Welcome to Breaking the Cycle. My name is Alan Hyde, and I am joined tonight by a very special guest, PhD psychologist and staff psychologist at the Chrysalis Center. I just had to clarify that. And her name is Karolina Shander, right? Did I pronounce that right? Shander?
Karolina.
Karolina Shander. Yeah. Yeah. So tonight we're going to get into Karolina's background, and we're going to talk about sports, psychology, and Karolina's research and just her perspectives. But first, why don't we get some feedback from you on just kind of what got you in the field and the direction that you've taken in the field?
Yeah. I think that answer has changed a little bit over the last couple of years, but has typically been very consistent of, I thought I wanted to be in business when I entered college. As a swimmer, I was like, okay, I'll do my 4 years of swimming and I'll go into business and I'll do international business. I'm going to travel the world. And then I took a psychology course and I was like, wait, okay, understanding people, understanding myself, understanding the world around me. And so I really started getting curious about that and switched my major, and was really fortunate that throughout my collegiate experience at University of Iowa, we were fortunate to have a sports psychologist hired my sophomore year, and was introduced to sport and performance psychology, which got me really excited and also helped me navigate my own performance anxieties, specifically performing at big meets. And so really kind of used some of my own therapy experiences with Dr. Kelly Moran Miller to be able to also plug her brain of like, how'd you get into this?
Yeah.
And kind of she helped me navigate what applying to grad school might look like, and then I kind of shot my shot and got into University of North Texas and landed here. That's a really fast summary for 10 years.
Yeah. And that was the first place you applied to?
No, I applied to, I don't know, at the time, probably about 10 to 12 different places. Some of them were just primarily counseling psychology programs because I wanted to look at overall wellness and health of people and well-being. And then there were only a couple sport and performance programs, and UNT was one of them. And so when I applied the first time around, I didn't even get a response. And a part of me was like, nah, like I want to wait. And so I took a year off, did some research, did some self-me search, did some coaching of swimming, and remained in the sporting world, and then reapplied and was able to land a spot in 2015.
Yeah. Now, for those who aren't familiar with swimming, right, there are a lot of different meets. I'm not even going to pretend to know what they're named, or I could probably the backstroke.
There's one.
There's one. But what were your just predominant?
I swam breaststroke. I did the individual medley a little bit, but that was more of I had to pick a third event, and so I did the 200 individual medley, but I was primarily a 100 and 200 breaststroker. Knees bent in at all times.
Okay. That's the form?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. Nice. And, we don't have to go too much into this, but there's been a lot in the swimming world, just around mental health in the last couple of years. We, obviously political stuff, but just around, I think, people advocating for themselves. And we didn't get a chance to talk about that before, but I'm curious if you had any thoughts on just kind of the state of mental health, not just around swimming, but that tends to be a hot topic because what's her name? The big swimmer who's dealing with the abdication for women's rights and those kind of things. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yes, the name is going to escape me right now in this moment, but there's a number of them who are currently speaking about mental health in general. I mean, with Missy Franklin talking a lot about kind of her experience after she won several gold medals, and then kind of 4 years later was kind of expected to continue to perform at a high level. Right. Then even Michael Phelps and his kind of journey throughout the last, 2 decades. But I think just when I entered the swimming world, which was really, I think, late in my perspective, but in, I don't know, what was it, 2005, I don't even think mental health was talked about in sport at all. At least I didn't notice.
Yeah.
In high school, I don't think I ever talked about that. I didn't think about it. It was more of get out of your own way, don't dwell on things, kind of a lot more of this maybe avoidance mindset a little bit. But then I think just throughout the individuals that I was fortunate to be around, I started even then like consuming media about that.
Sure.
And then actually being able to connect with athletes who were talking about mental health. And I think over the last decade, more people have had the platforms to be able to talk about mental health and their experiences, and it's been welcomed versus shut down, which I think has been a massive change and a really needed one.
Yeah, and go figure. You know, part of why I ask is because you have the experience with swimming, and I feel like it was the sports you least expected that paved that path. It was swimming and gymnastics and like really, you know, sports that a lot of people may do when they're young, but then, you know, they get shadowed by like the big three and that kind of stuff. But a lot of the athletes in those realms have really paved a path to have some pretty open conversations.
Yeah, it's been amazing and also very heartbreaking to watch too, because although these individuals have brought to light a lot of these challenges and issues, it's definitely shined a light on all of the maybe systems that are broken across our nation and world.
Yeah, that could be a whole nother conversation, huh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, you know, and Gabe and I have talked a lot about this, but, you know, there's only so much other than having these kind of conversations you can do to change systems like that. But thankfully, you know, we can come together and do things like this and start to shed more and more light on it. But definitely, I think athletes we're good at that kind of stuff. You know, we're used to, like we were talking about before, performance. We tend to be high achievers. You know, we are kind of the ones to fall into positions, I think, after college where, you know, there's natural leadership and things like that. But you work with athletes actively. So instead of me ranting, I'd rather hear you talk about some of these perspectives.
I mean, I could say a lot of different things. But yeah, right now, my practice is primarily almost split 50-50 of athletes and then general population. But I think what's really amazing is being able to see how sport is able to shape people's lives. It's not just something that they do, but something that they are, and has helped them maybe also articulate some of these transferable skills that they've had in their sport, in their careers, or in their relationships. But also how sport has been pivotal in how somebody's developed in their human development, just as a person. I love talking with athletes about how their sport and the sport culture has shaped them, and how that culture has also capitalized on their own backgrounds and their own families of origin, and how it's helped them find places of belonging, and also a lot of pride.
Yeah. You know, when I was kind of just prepping for this and thinking like, what do I want to ask her? I was definitely thinking about community, you know, because working in any type of mental health profession, that's going to be a huge piece to getting somebody on track when they're in distress. And it's amazing, not amazing to me, but, you know, how often I'll get athletes coming in and they don't have the community they used to have. And I'm curious, just from your perspective, and we're in the Dallas area, how you kind of go about getting people set up if they're lacking that, or just kind of, you know, maybe even some resources on what people are doing that work.
Yeah. Oof. I mean, that's something that's actually been recently coming up a lot more. I think this idea of getting plugged into the community, and like DFW is such a just group of people who have moved here, you know, from all over. Right. And so being able to find like their people is sometimes really challenging, and also finding adult friends is really challenging too.
Difficult.
And so what I really like to focus on is kind of being able to find the extension of their sport. So whether it's a master's club, or finding a community or like a summer league that is, you know, their sport in their area, right? Like, okay, does Dallas have a like a tennis club for women or for men on the weekends that they can do in addition to their careers and what they're kind of already really busy doing. But I really actually emphasize utilizing like social media. Not something that's my forte, but the individuals that are coming into my office are a lot more like savvy when it comes to that, and being able to just like reach out to people. There's no harm in like DMing somebody. I mean, like, yo, like, hey, do you still swim on the weekends? Like, hey, do you want to go to the Keller Natatorium? Like, let's get together, and kind of being able to just reach out and showcase that, like, hey, I'm doing this thing. Do you want to join me? Or just asking what people are up to. I haven't found a whole lot of resources, to be honest, but being able to just get people to utilize their kind of like internet connections has been how most people have found their community.
Yeah, with the friends I've been making around here, we go to a place called Chicken and Pickle. And we play pickleball. It's great for, because one of my friends from high school, she was listening to the podcast and she was messaging me today, and her husband, I had played baseball with our freshman year of high school, and I've known them forever. And she asked, she's like, do you still play ball? And I was like, not unless I want to go to the hospital, but I try to stay active. But Chicken and Pickle places like that are really good. And I know there's a lot of community centers around here. This area is booming.
Yeah, and in addition to just like community centers or even like local, maybe like clubs or what would it be called? Like city, I don't know, parks. There's also a ton of really awesome venues that are connected with like churches, and a lot of the athletes that are also coming into my office, some of them at least, find some community outside of just sport, but then somehow sport comes into the picture anyway. That they find some connection when it comes to either religion or volunteering, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh, I joined like a rec basketball league.
Right.
And so I think sport somehow finds its way, even though that's not maybe how they begin to start managing those connections at the beginning.
Yeah, I think there's something about it, that it's like, I think about my friends growing up. If there's nothing to do, you pick up a basketball, and you just play, and that hasn't changed. I think what changes for us as adults is our desire to play. And we talked about that at the end of our podcast last week, of just like, get out and be messy. It's okay. All right. And remember to play, because it's going to be helpful for you. And I'm sure you see that a lot with the adults that you work with, just kind of like, it can be really serious, and I've got to be an adult and I've got these responsibilities, but carving out just a little bit of time can be hard.
The time, or even giving ourselves permission to play. I mean, you said that and I chuckled kind of in my head because, as you mentioned, I work as a staff psychologist at the Chrysalis Center, and Dr. Dodd and Dr. Pulliam, who are the founders of the Chrysalis Center, have cultivated that piece as a therapist quite well. And when I did my postdoctoral training there, that was a big part of their emphasis of, okay, what is it like to actually like play? Even as a therapist, yes, you are ethical and you're doing all the right things, but how do you enjoy this? How do you kind of play and get messy, not have to be so rigid and uptight? And I think sport allows us to do that in a very kind of cohesive and structured way, but then as soon as it's almost like we step off the court, we forget that we can continue to do that unless there's a ball or a pool or something involved. And oh gosh, like even if you're not good at tennis, like I'm not, just getting out there and being able to just swing a racket, there's something about that.
Yeah, I remember years ago when I started seeing my therapist, she had asked me, what are you doing for fun? And I had all these ideas, and she's like, so you have all the ideas, what are you waiting for? And that question right there hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, I don't know what I'm waiting for, but it was pivotal. I needed to be reminded, because I just left to my own devices. And I think this is true for a lot of us. It's not even so much we're not going to take care of ourselves in that way. It's like there's so many other things going on in life. And I'm sure for you guys listening, it's like you got kids, or you got a significant other, or a full-time job, or just the bills. And it can be understated and forgotten how important it is to just have fun.
Or you're reaching for the next thing, right? And of course, maybe when it comes to like our past lives as athletes, it's like, okay, that's past me, but that's not true. Right. That's maybe a past chapter of you, but that athlete is still a huge part of you, and is a fraction of you that continues to live in some way, shape, or form, and being able to lean into that can actually bolster all these other aspects of who you are, your family, being a good spouse, being a good parent, being a good whatever you are in your career. But we see it so separately sometimes that can be a really big detriment versus seeing it as something that can actually magnify and cultivate these other aspects of our lives.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to make sure as well, while I have you, that we don't just pigeonhole ourselves into sports, because for those listening, a PhD is a slog. It is work, and we are sitting with someone who has done it. She has gone through it. She published her research, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But just outside of sports, what other kind of niches or just areas of interest do you find yourself gravitating to?
That's a good question, and one where I think I like to be broad and also specific at the same time, because otherwise then I will not have enough time in my day.
Sure.
But I think the way that I view humans, or at least people, is that we're all performers. We're all athletes. We perform every single day. Whether it's me being my best self as a mom, or is it being my best self as a friend, or is it me, trying to be my best self as a, mediocre CrossFit athlete. Like I'm trying to perform and be at my best. And sometimes I only have 80% of my tank, but how do I actually activate that 80% and utilize it to my advantage? And so I look at the people that are coming in to kind of share their life with me of like, how can I do that? How can I help you do that? How can I sit next to you in a car and be the passenger that can look out the window? I have the emergency brake, I have the snacks, and I can kind of help you see what's kind of out there. I can help you, see like that little, I don't know, there's a road runner over there that you might run over, or like there's a pothole. But how can I help you get to the destination that you want to be at, but also not forget about the things along the way and not get super lost, maybe a little bit of lost, but have the map anyway.
Yeah, sometimes it's fun when you're off the beaten path.
Yeah,
as long as we keep the road in an eye shot.
Yes, absolutely. Or at least making sure we have enough gas to get to where we need to go. Yeah. But I primarily really thrive in sport and in teams and in organizations. I think that's where I definitely have the most interest and the most passion and also the most expertise. I would love to say that there are other aspects of performance or sport even that I'm really, an expert in, but right now it's just sport and performance and primarily athletes and then individuals just trying to be their best.
Yeah. And you mentioned organizations and that you work with some that have that expertise as well. Do you guys at the Chrysalis Center, do you bring in organizations? Do you go out to them? How does all that work for you guys?
Well, it depends. The best answer in psychology, but actually we have a couple of psychologists within our practice who actually have some more specialized training in organizational psychology with some specific assessments to work with teams, leaders, and not just on leadership development, but some specific like personality and assessment measures. And so we kind of like to collaborate with lots of different psychologists. Like Dr. Dodd primarily is doing a ton of work with some individuals in various business organizations, and so we're also just trying to build a team right now like that. Yeah. We're bringing in other individuals into the Chrysalis Center to be able to, I guess, have a host of individuals that can help a broad kind of population who's coming in. Yeah, and I'll have all of your links, right? So as you guys are listening, if you're interested, at the end, when we post it everywhere, we'll have your links, the link directly to your page on the Chrysalis Center. Is a very nice website. I know I was mentioning but it's very well done. They did a great job. The colors, the theme, and I hope you saw, and those of you who are listening and watching, at the Chrysalis Center, we look at health as very like integrative, and that well-being is not just one thing, it's not constant, and it's ever changing. And so all of us that work there, we're also so welcome to feedback and flexibility. Like yes, there's a way in which I work and how I interact with my clients, but also I am continuing to learn about myself and the world and the people that are coming in, and we look forward to feedback and kind of interest and info from y'all, because we want to be the best kind of individuals who are serving our people. Yeah, I noticed that about you right away with just the interactions when I reached out to do the podcast, and you were so willing and so gracious.
And it doesn't shock me that you're surrounded by those kind of people in a center that is doing wonderful things here in the area.
Thank you. It's been a huge blessing to find that. After I did my internship at Texas A&M and needed to find a place to do a year of training before I could sit for my licensure exam, I really wanted to be in a place that would push me, just like I wanted to be my best self. I figured that I needed to be around individuals who had a heck of a lot of experience in the real world, and I've landed in a really wonderful place that really helped me cultivate, I guess, who I am as a psychologist.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you're settling more and more into this, here's a question I get a lot, like after I post videos like this or just generally talk about the field. And we don't have to spend too much time here, but I would love your perspective on just sharing with the listeners kind of, what to expect prepping if you want to get into this field, if you wanted to get a PhD, and just kind of what worked for you and how to keep that kind of like just balance and mindfulness as they go about it if they're going to seek it.
Yeah. Right now there's two ways to work in sport and performance. One way is to go in and get either a master's in counseling or do a master's in sports psychology. Either way, then you're going to have to do some extra training either in sport and performance or get some classes in counseling psychology to be able to sit for your CMPC. All of that is about a 2 to 3 year process. There are a lot more programs that are master's level in counseling than PhD programs, but it just kind of depends on what you're wanting to sign up for. Right now, it's just there are so many kind of really awesome programs with really awesome people that can teach you about how to be a kick butt, psychologist or counselor. It's just kind of going to be about how you think about people. That's what I would be looking at in some of these programs is how do you think about people? And then also how long do you want to be in school? Because a PhD is anywhere from, 5 to 7 years, depending on how quickly you do your research, which I did not do mine very quickly.
Yeah.
But so it's about 5 to 7 years. And then there's a lot of hours that go into receiving then your licensure in the end. You need to accumulate another 1,500 after you finish school.
Yeah. And then for the PhD, do you guys do the EPPP?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
Yeah.
sir. Yeah.
So for those who don't know, that's the test. That's the exam at the end.
It's a doozy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it took it more than once. That was a challenge in and of itself, but I think it lines up also with just like how I like to work with my clients of, it was a goal of mine to be a licensed psychologist, and I could have quit and just, chosen my other path, which would have been a soul cycle instructor. That was my other path that I was wanting to go down. But I wanted to stay committed, and there was a lot of, frustration and disappointment and shame and guilt that came along with failing, but being able to kind of buckle up and change my strategy of how I studied and how I prepared for the exam. And I tried to not let it define who I am and move forward and got it done.
Yeah. Yeah, that's the athlete in you.
My dad would be proud.
Yeah. Nice. So for those, right, who are listening, right, just from what Karolina was sharing, if you're going to do it, right, because I get asked this pretty much every week, if you're going to do it, it's really a time commitment. And then on top of that, which just as we talk, we're going to be talking around these concepts as well, is like there are a lot of emotions that go into this process. And one thing I'll kind of plant is like, when you're working with people and you're getting trained to work with people, it's going to bring a lot out of you. And it's going to reflect kind of what we'll tie in maybe to your blog post, right? Is just kind of like making sure when you venture into something that you're sure what it is that you're doing, that you're not leaving things unturned, right? And that if you get through it and there's things you feel that were left unturned, how are you coping with that? And that's a brief synopsis of kind of what I took from your blog post, but we can get into that in a moment. But is there anything you would add to just kind of that?
I mean, Yes, it's a journey. I think it's a self-discovery journey going into either a master's or a PhD, it doesn't matter, but into being somebody who works with people. You have to know yourself really well. I think that's something that I would have said I did know myself really well, only to relearn all the things by my own therapy process, which I highly recommend if you are going into this field to please invest in a therapist of your own, to be able to just understand who you are and how you're changing by the people that you are working with, because that was the biggest benefit to me, as well as my colleagues, listening to my colleagues who watched me change and grow too.
Yeah. In your PhD program, do they require it as well, that you have to get therapy hours, or?
They don't require it.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm on the fence of if I wish they did, because it feels kind of also, it's expensive and can be really hard to find. And then when you're wearing all different hats, you probably don't have a whole lot of time for that. But I highly recommend it. And a lot of my colleagues and I did. I wish I would have started at the beginning. I wish I would have gone my first year or first day, because the first day of class when we sat there and they're like, all right, like, tell me who you are as a therapist. I was like, oh, no idea.
Yeah, no clue. What do I do with my hands?
My hands, my cup, my everything. Yeah, that was a lot.
Do you remember your first client?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to say anything about it or tell a story?
Or first client?
Let's do both, because I feel like, this is where we definitely will relate. It's like they're two different stories, right? So you start where you want, but definitely I want to hear them both if you're open to it.
Yeah, absolutely. My practice client, like we at UNT, we advertise that we're students and we want somebody coming in, and our professor will screen the students, so they're probably not coming in with a whole host of challenges, more maybe like, oh, I have some anxiety here, I have some troubles with like my spouse or like my partner, so probably more like short-term focused, and I just remember this human coming in, and he sat across from me, and he was just not interested in what I had to say. I was like, I'm like fairly bubbly, and I'm trying to understand you, and like I'm asking questions. I'm also in my head of like, is this an open-ended question? Is this a closed-ended question? Am I talking too much? And he was just not having it. And at the end of the session, I for sure was like, oh, he's never going to come back. And he's like, okay, I'll see you next week. And I was shocked. I don't know what I provided him, but I did something. So that was that. But my first real client, whether that's in grad school, it was actually an athlete. And at the end of the session, she told me that I was trying too hard. Which kind of which like sums up, I think, a lot of my first experiences in a lot of areas, is that I forget to just lean into who I am, and I try to a little bit too hard to connect or to convey something, which she taught me a lot in that 10 seconds of giving me that feedback. Yeah,
it's amazing what we'll hear about ourselves when we listen to people. They'll tell you.
They will. They definitely will. And I wish I would have listened a little bit more earlier.
It's I remember those early years. I was not the most guarded in the world, but I was a young dude. I wasn't the most in touch with my feelings, and I was the director of my program always used to call me a bull in a china shop, because I cared. I really was committed. But man, I had a lot to learn.
I had a lot to learn too, and maybe this is too much information or not, but my colleagues also were the ones who gave me such important feedback. I think I was in my 4th year. We're in a group therapy class, because at UNT we also have to do group therapy. And we're sitting around in a circle, and they're like, you know what, Carol, that's my nickname, it's Carol, you like live in a brick house with like maybe a window, and you don't open the window very much, but like you say that like you're open and you're transparent, but you don't let people in.
Ouch.
For like the people that were the closest to me, I even lived with one of them, and like hearing that, I was really hurt, but also really grateful, because I think since then have been able to kind of open up into actually acknowledging the feelings that I have, because they were so stifled, I think, because I didn't feel like they belonged in the therapy room, that I as a therapist couldn't have any, so I then as a human shouldn't have any either, and that was a couple years of unlearning for sure.
Yeah, yeah, it's that upheaval, you know. It's like when you swish your feet on the bottom of the ocean. It's like, what's gonna settle?
Ooh.
Yeah,
Seaweed,
exactly.
weird.
Yeah, exactly. My first practice client, you know, when we asked the students to come in, we finished the first session, and she starts talking about something where I'm like, that sounds oddly familiar, and she started mentioning the high school that I had gone to, and she's a couple years younger. The problem with that is that my sister is a couple years younger and went to the high school that I went to, so I contact my sister, and I was like, you know, I've got to make sure, you know, just, did you play volleyball with this person? And she's like, you know, she confirmed, and she's like, why? I was like, I can't say, but I go back to my professor, and I had to get a new practice client because my first client ever had played volleyball with my sister in high school.
So you have to somehow like pass them to somebody else and get a different client without saying too much.
Yeah, and to like try to confirm, because like I kind of knew, but like there was no other way to confirm. It was just so tricky, and I didn't, you know, I mean, the last thing I'm thinking about is like all of the ethics and confidentiality. Like my professor was like, it would have been fine, you know, but it's probably best that you stay on top. But talk about a nightmare right off the bat. I was like, oh my God, what do I do?
It's a small world, but even here in DFW, right? Like there's, you think, I mean, these are massive cities, but you run into individuals who know somebody who knows somebody, and then you think like, oh wow, like the world is much smaller, specifically in sport too. Someone will see that like, I went to Iowa and I swam, and then they know this or that, and having to then make some of those decisions of, you know, okay, maybe I shouldn't be seeing this person, and how to kind of give them resources elsewhere, but how to not give too much away at the same time too.
Yeah.
It's tricky.
It is tricky. And I've always, I don't want to say I'm like hard nosed on this. I just don't work with family. Like if I've treated your family member, I don't work with like another family member. I'm glad that was your reaction. I was not testing the waters, but also curious, like your perspective, because there are a lot of clinicians out there, and maybe for those listening too, I personally think, without any judgment and giving the grace, I think that can be a bit of a red flag, you know, working with the families and blurring those lines. But that could be a whole nother conversation. But I'm curious your take on just kind of where, you know, where your lines are, and kind of what you really would not do. And maybe that's too open-ended of a question, but like in the field when you're practicing, the boundaries and the ethics that you follow. And, you know, I'm curious if you could put a few words to that.
Yeah, you're also talking about something that's really gray in sport, which is some of these boundaries. But in terms of like individual private practice, if I've treated your sister, I will not see you, right. or a parent, or even there's certain situations where I might see a couple who then transfer into individual. Just one person might want to continue, but it really just depends on the course of treatment and what was the focus, and also how they feel about that. It's not probably very typical though for me to kind of have multiple relationships with anybody. I also will not see somebody that goes to my gym who sees me in a different kind of a way, where I try to avoid that as much as possible, just because it can get really challenging, and people might see some different ways that they show up, and may see me in different ways that I show up, and can make it a lot more complicated than, you know, what's in our four-wall room. But I try to avoid that as much as possible. Yeah, I had to navigate this one, you know, without going into too much detail. I shared with you on the phone, I'm a 12-stepper, so, you know, California is kind of a hub for that kind of stuff, and back then I worked in treatment centers, and then I specialized in working with 12-steppers, and so that was an interesting line, you know, sharing with certain clients, like, you know, I won't take referrals if that person is in those meetings with me, and if you run into me at a meeting, I'm not just going to come up to you and give you a hug, you know, like, you're welcome to come say hi to me, but most of the time we're probably going to just go our own ways in those rooms, you know? Yeah, especially also with teams. It's a little bit different, I guess, if somebody knows that you're working with a team or assigned to a team or something like that. But for example, at UNT, I was fortunate enough to work with the men's and women's basketball team at one point, but was seeing individual athletes of other sports and having those conversations of, hey, when I see you at a game, I won't say hi to you.
Yeah.
And educating them on it's not a me not wanting to say hi, but more of a I want to protect your privacy. And if you want to come say hi to me, cool. But you kind of let's talk about what you would be saying and how we can frame that, because I might have my spouse with me at the game or a friend, and being able to maintain their privacy and confidentiality in our space is really important to me.
Do you ever run into the obvious one of you're treating a team and then you're going to treat an individual, but they're dating someone that's on the team that you're treating?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And sometimes they don't know that each of them are coming into individual, but then we see, it's complicated.
It is. It's an interesting field. And I love how interesting the therapeutic relationships are that develop, and, just getting to see the different sides of people as they connect with a relationship like that. But there's a lot of things we have to navigate on that end, huh? Just the back end of making sure people's confidentiality is protected and that we're monitoring all the laws and ethics. And
there's a lot to think about. And what you also said on the phone, I think, is super true, is that there's a number of therapists and a lot of us out there, but the therapeutic relationship is, I believe, what makes therapy work. And, I'm not everybody's cup of tea, and I'm not going to be best suited for everybody. And so for me, I don't take offense to that, but actually emphasize that, somebody else might be a better fit for you. But if we, have a mutual respect, understanding, stick to all these ethics and legal rules, and also really invest in one another, that's where the work is going to be most fruitful, which is great. And I hope everybody can think about that, that the relationship is the most important when they're looking for somebody to work with. Yeah.
And maybe this is a good transition to talk about the blog post that you wrote. I thought it was a brilliant piece, and we'll link that for you guys as well. It's March Sadness.
Wrote it last year during March Madness.
Right. It's very clever. As I shared with you before, when I pulled it up, I was laughing right away because it's just such a clever blog post title. But, then reading through it as a former athlete myself, I was thinking about, and you said something when we had sat down before the camera was rolling of I didn't really think about these things. I kind of found my own way to navigate it. And that's why I think it's so powerful, what you had written there. And I'm curious if you could just kind of shed some light on what's in that blog post, and they'll have a chance to read it if they're interested. But I think that's some of the meat and potatoes so people can really get to know you tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. As an athlete and as somebody who loves sports in general, I, for myself, probably saw swimming was a means to an end, was a means to get to college, was a means to then be able to receive some kind of, financial support, but also to have a sense of community. And then I definitely did not think about what happened afterwards. I thought about, I'm going to graduate and then I'm going to either get a job or, go to grad school, but I never thought about what happened to the athlete me or what was going to happen to the athlete me.
Can I interject with one just side note question? Outside of the Olympics, is there any professional swimming you could get paid to do? Is that
you can now? Okay. But I would say 10 years ago that wasn't as common. That was going to be your number one and number two. You weren't going to be getting sponsorships based off of social media. My Facebook and my Instagram was not probably suited for that. I definitely didn't know how to pose or do anything to sell water or a cup. But that's definitely grown over the last 10 years, where people can continue their career, even if they aren't maybe number one or two in the world, which is really, really awesome. But there is master's level swimming all over. Texas is actually huge with that, especially because we do have some outside pools, and a lot more pools than Illinois, which is where I'm from. And being able to continue swimming, I never thought about that. I still don't know why. Maybe that's something I'll ask my therapist to talk about. But I don't know why I didn't think about continuing it. I did a little bit for a couple of months. My parents are originally from Poland, and I had an opportunity to potentially try to be on the Polish national team, but there was just not enough time when I was pursuing graduate school to be able to train and do that. And so I jumped into another cardio sport, which was running.
Yeah. Goodness.
And I pursued marathon running, which was really, really awesome. But what I didn't realize is I was trying to fill a void, of structure for exercise. I didn't know how to exercise. Before I swam, you couldn't pay me to run a mile.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
could not pay me to lift a weight. I'd played piano competitively for about a decade. And so transitioning into swimming, I didn't know what exercise meant. I didn't know what it meant for my body. I didn't know anything about nutrition. I didn't know anything really about friends. Like I had a lot of family, and I had friends through just coincidences or through piano or the people that were kind of living around me. But then I was searching for that after I graduated. I was really having a hard time moving past my teammates at Iowa. And fortunately, one of my best friends actually lived in Dallas when we both graduated and when I started my graduate career here. And I kind of had that little piece of that, which was so helpful and so amazing. And then I started running but very unconsciously kind of playing out some of these patterns of a need to succeed, a need to achieve, a need to prove myself, a need to feel like I was worthy of something. Which was really hard to find in graduate school when I kept not doing super well, or our professors were like, you must do better. And so it was a really tough process, and it's not talked about in school. It is a little bit more now over the last probably 6 to 7 years. The NCAA has instituted a lot of programming for continuation after college. Most universities, especially in D1, at least take some kind of course about life after sport. They do get some information about nutrition post competing, which is super helpful. None of those things I think were a part of my journey.
I didn't hear any of that. They were just like, hey, good luck.
I mean, here's the career center or something. There was maybe some more extension when it came to career, or like, hey, if you want to learn about your transferable skills, hey, take these tests or whatnot, which was helpful in one end. But when it came to, expanding my identity outside of being an athlete, when it came to how to find a community, how to have conversations with regular people who aren't maybe athletes, how to even just grieve the fact that you're losing something.
And that was one of the grief intersection was palpable in what you had written, and just reading it from the lens of a clinician, and then I sat with it for a little bit. I went back and read it from the lens of a former baseball player, and there were a couple lines in there that really resonated with me around the topic of, like, when things feel like unresolved, and I remember for a lot of years after baseball, and I was well into studying my master's, and I would often think about what I had left unresolved on a baseball field, and there was no way to go back. But there was a way forward. I just didn't find it for a lot of years after. I thought your blog really hit on a lot of those key points to not just bring some of those emotions up to think about, but I thought you explained it really well.
Well, thank you. I think it's something that I couldn't articulate at all until I started doing some of my research for my thesis, which right now in the data for transition out of sport, which is primarily actually done in Europe, not in the U.S., which is a fun fact.
And that's one of the ones that you sent.
And one of the things that actually leads to better satisfaction, whether it's with somebody's body, their overall mental health, and less depressive symptoms upon graduation or retirement, is somebody completing their goals. But if you think about it, how many of us really achieved all of our goals through sport? Maybe we did. Maybe more people did. Maybe not. I didn't.
Right. Yeah, same.
And so this piece of what to do with the unresolved, or even being able to grieve, maybe you missed being able to qualify for NCAAs by, 0.04. Like that means a lot. And having the space to process that, I don't know how many athletes get that upon graduating or even during their season. Yeah,
when I think of my teammates, we won a championship my senior year, and so that helped a lot. I mean, I can look back and think of like the things that were left on the table, but that did help a lot. But when I think about like my teammates that I graduated with, or just any that I've stayed in touch with over the years, the only reason I can look and say like, yeah, I go to therapy and I talk about these things is because I became one. And a lot of these guys, I care about them deeply. They're great men. They're not in therapy. They're not, they took a long time through other means to find this information in ways that I think are more roundabout in society. It's not bad by any means. There's a lot of grace in coming to these realizations. But man, therapy could really, really help when you're coming out of that. And I think about that often. Like, I don't know how settled I would have been, coming in right out of baseball, but it would have been so helpful.
Absolutely. I mean, being able to have those kinds of resources within the systems for athletes that are retiring, whether it's even in high school, but primarily in college, once they've kind of really spent much more of their time, their energy, even who they are into their sport, that would be extremely vital. But also, and maybe this is my own journey right now as being a new mom, of like, I wish we talked about retirement earlier. Yeah. Not like retirement when we're retiring, but more of like preparing to retire. But it comes at such a potential cost. At least that's what a lot of coaches or even teams talk about in some of the literature of why they don't prepare some of their athletes for retirement. Is like, the focus is supposed to be excellence. The focus is supposed to be what's at hand. But there's room to talk about what happens after sport, or what happens not just after, but in addition to sport, focus outside of just the athlete lens. I think we would build such more comprehensive and like stronger humans if we were able to kind of address some of that earlier. Yeah.
I think about my college coach. I went to a Division III school. It's called the University of Laverne in Southern California. And our coach there, he's NCAA Hall of Fame guy. Really does a good job of like cultivating, men who are just kind, healthy, want to be a member of a community. And with all of that, there's, he builds and cultivates all that, and still, right, there's this piece that I thought this guy's prepared me for life, and then you get out and realize, like, it's not that he didn't, it's that there's this whole other lane that's not his focus. Yeah. That's not his specialty. And so, I've gone back there and spoken to, like, if some of the guys, like, years after I had graduated, and I'll talk about mental health, and I'll talk about, staying away from substances and the percentages and what the research shows us and all that. And their eyes light up, because it's like they've never heard any of this information unless they're in a Psych 101 course or that's their major,
Yeah. And some of it, right, is just having access to the info earlier on of, hey, in my dissertation, right, the two main things that stick out of, if you have continual community connection, and if you have a focus outside of sport upon graduation, you have better outcomes in the first, let's say, 4 months upon graduation, which is the more critical time that we are looking at. Like, if I knew that, I would have tried to find a community prior to graduation, or tried to find a way to get plugged in and have a sense of support. And I probably would have started to set goals for myself outside of sport much earlier, that would have given me excitement to retire, instead of just being pretty heartbroken.
Yeah. It's a rush, when it's done, it all hits at once. And it's mixed with, too, like, you're getting all of these accomplishments of, like, you're graduating, getting, your degree. And I remember I was talking with my therapist about this, is like, one of my problems was the if-whens. Like, I'll be happy if, I'll be happy when, which is a lot of athletes fall into that, because we're such achievers and go-getters. And I remember that graduation, I'm walking across to get the degree, I see my family, and I felt that emptiness of, like, what's next? Like, I was not in the moment, because and it's not that no one had prepped me for it, although that's true. It was that I needed some guidance there. Yeah. And I had no clue I needed that guidance.
And even some of these skills, right, like whether it's in a Psych 101 class, or in a therapy office, or in a sport and performance consultant's office, right, this piece of awareness of ourselves and what we're looking for and what we need, but then the attention to the present moment, and being able to find maybe not just satisfaction or not just gratitude, but some mixture of the two, of being able to find some level of, peace in what we have in the moment. I would have benefited a lot from that as well.
Absolutely.
Being able to just be where my feet are.
Yeah. I want to make sure too, while we have a few minutes here, just to kind of close everything out, we're going to share your research articles so that the listeners can see those if they're interested, if they're like us and are a bit sadistic and want to read research.
They're not that long. Read the summary.
Yeah, but I have two of yours pulled up here. So the first one, you've referred to both, but the first one is College Student Athletes and Psychological Well-Being in Retirement, which is essentially what you and I have just been talking about. Anything, just kind of real quick snippet for them of like what to expect when they read through it and that you would add.
Yeah, what to expect. I mean, there's some highlights of, certain things that are going to lead to better outcomes in retirement, which is going to be some of the things I just talked about, which is like having a new focus, having a sense of support. There's also some other stuff in there. We use a balance scale. It's a basically list of 10 items, which those 10 items actually are connected to the 10 tips that are actually in the blog post of, one of them is developing a new life focus outside of sport. It's like, okay, like, where do I find that?
Yeah.
Where do I find a life focus? And so that first article will kind of be talking a little bit about that and the previous data that's been done longitudinally and just like in the past probably decade in NCAA kind of research.
Yeah.
So.
I'm noticing as you answer that we're going to have to do a part 2 to this because there's so much is what, like, I get a lot of athletes too, like on, just former friends and also some new people. I think because of some of the topics Gabe and I have talked about that I'll post it on like YouTube, and then I get those kind of like emails or questions. And I think they're going to get a lot of benefit from this and just to be able to sit down again sometime in the future and talk through those 10 tips and just get more of your perspective. I think they'll find really helpful.
Absolutely.
But you do have one more research article that was the transition from sport and life satisfaction. It's a long, but that's the gist. What would you say to expect if they're going to sit down and read this one?
The second one is a lot about this piece of transition out of sport is conceptual. It is not often talked about, but in the way that I talk about it or think about it, it's conceptualized as a huge loss. And so what to do with that loss and also what helps buffer that loss. So yes, having other pieces of your identity outside of just athlete, as well as those sense of connections. But it dives into a deeper kind of understanding of what happens in the first 3 months after retirement for those who are competing in the NCAA. And it was it was the year of COVID. We had to filter out the individuals who were affected by COVID in terms of their sport seasons being cut, but that there's a lot of research out there about that too now, which is helpful for us as well.
That was an interesting time for athletes.
Yeah, and even that, right? Your senior year, you have COVID and your season's cut short. Right. What do you do with that?
Yeah.
You did not prepare. Both articles talk about how if you are prepared for retirement or like you are going to retire or be done, which that is even hard to define, but your outcomes of well-being are a lot higher. But what that means and how people decide that is very inconclusive.
Yeah.
So, but the individuals who were affected by the COVID year and had to be done competing, I mean, I hope that they got some time to grieve that.
Yeah,
because
truly.
I imagine it was really, really tough.
Yeah, my heart went out. Yeah, I couldn't imagine. I have 2 rapid fire questions for you before we have you plug your information.
Great.
Who is your favorite childhood cartoon?
Oh, Snoopy.
Snoopy?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
How would Snoopy benefit from coming to see you for therapy?
Ooh. Wow. I think Snoopy would know that I'm one of his biggest cheerleaders. And I think he would feel very allowed to feel whatever he wants to in the room. He could be as angry as he could be as happy as he could be, and I'm going to be the same consistent, stable human with bad jokes, but a very stable human who still doesn't know what to do with the cup in her hands as she sits across from him.
Touche. If you were going to start a mental health amusement park, what would be the first ride that you built and why?
Ooh, Well, I think it's because I would have benefited from this one where you can't see where you're going. So probably a blindfolded one, because I know that I would have benefited from some work on being able to enjoy the journey and the ride versus being able to see exactly where I'm going.
Fair enough. All right.
I love that.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I love those questions. It's a lot of fun. So as we close out, why don't you go ahead and plug where they can find you, and then we'll also link those things in the social medias.
Awesome. Yeah. Chrysalis Center, CHRYSALIS Center, .com. My page is on there. Also, you can find me on Psychology Today, Karolina Shander. And I think that's about it. Oh, just started my new Instagram. And that's going to be fun. Dr. Shander Psych. And I think that's about it.
All righty. Well, Karolina, thank you for joining us. And guys, as always, we break the cycle together. Thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you.
Nailed it.
Woohoo!
Yeah.